Late one night, I noticed how often I pay extra just to keep things smooth. Not luxury, not indulgence, just avoiding a tiny inconvenience. The longer line, the extra click, the mild awkwardness. It feels harmless in the moment, almost responsible, like I'm buying myself 5 minutes apiece. I remember telling myself that it wasn't really spending, more like friction management, but there was a subtle feeling underneath it. This quiet impatience with my own time and energy. I didn't want to wrestle with life after a long day, so I paid to make it slide by easier. What I didn't clock back then was how often that choice showed up. Not once, not dramatically, just again and again and again, quietly stacking up while I stayed focused on getting through the evening without one more annoyance. Gas stations were probably where I did this the most. I'd pull in already tired, already done with the day, and grab whatever was closest. A drink, a snack, something warm. $4 here, $7 there. I never thought of it as spending. It felt more like a small tax for being exhausted. I'd stand at the counter thinking, this isn't the time to be disciplined, and that was the trick. I framed it as mercy. But when I added it up once, just out of curiosity, it was close to $80 a month, almost $1,000 a year, for stuff I barely remembered buying. That realization didn't hit loud. It just sat there, because the worst part wasn't the number. It was noticing how often I'd told myself I deserved to skip even the smallest inconvenience without ever asking what that habit was slowly costing me. Food delivery is the cleanest example of this. Not the big orders, the random ones. The nights where cooking felt like too much thinking. A $12 meal quietly turning into $26 after fees, tip, and some vague service charge I never read. I used to tell myself I was paying for time, but I wasn't really getting time back. I was just postponing effort. When I finally did the math, 3 orders a week, about $30 each, that's $90, almost $400 a month. Over a year, that's close to $5,000. That was the moment I didn't want to look at first, because nothing about those meals felt extravagant. They felt normal, necessary even, and realizing how much I was paying just to not be mildly uncomfortable in my own kitchen made me feel oddly exposed, like I'd been leaking money without ever making a decision. Subscriptions work the same way, just quieter. I didn't sign up because I needed them. I signed up because canceling later felt easier than deciding now. $10 here, $15 there, things I used sometimes, things I meant to check on. Every one of them removed a tiny bit of friction from my life. Music without ads, shows without waiting, storage without deleting. Individually, they felt harmless. Together, they were over $100 a month, more than my electric bill. And the uncomfortable part wasn't the cost. It was realizing how little attention I gave them once they were running. They became background noise, automatic, paying to avoid the mild annoyance of limits. I remember scrolling through my statements thinking, I don't even enjoy half of this anymore. I just like knowing it's there, ready, quietly draining without asking anything back. Credit cards make avoiding friction feel especially clean. Tap, done, gone. No pause, no wait. I used to think the problem with cards was big purchases. Turns out it was the small ones, the stuff I didn't want to think about. Coffee because the line was shorter, parking fees to avoid walking, a faster checkout option that cost extra but saved maybe 2 minutes. I told myself I'd deal with it later, and later always felt like someone else's problem. When I finally looked at a full statement, really looked, there were dozens of tiny charges I couldn't remember, individually meaningless, together heavy. That was a strange feeling, not guilt. More like realizing I'd been saying yes all day long without ever noticing the question. There's a certain kind of tired where inconvenience feels personal, like life is pushing back. On those days, I'd pay almost anything to make things easier. Express shipping, premium seating, faster service. Not because I needed it, but because I couldn't handle one more small resistance. I remember paying an extra $15 for same-day delivery on something I didn't even need that badly. It showed up. I felt nothing. No relief, just another box. That's when it started to feel off. The money was leaving, but the comfort wasn't sticking. It was like drinking water that never quite quenched the thirst. And that's uncomfortable to admit, because it suggests the problem wasn't inconvenience. It was fatigue. and I was using money to smooth over something money couldn't actually fix. Ride shares were another quiet one. Short trips, 10 minutes, $20. I told myself it was about safety or efficiency. Sometimes it was. A lot of times it was just about not wanting to wait, not wanting to think. When I added up a month once, it was over $200. That number surprised me. Not because it was huge, but because I hadn't felt it happening. It never felt like a choice, just a default. And defaults are dangerous that way. They don't ask for permission, they just keep going. Sitting with that realization felt awkward. Because I wasn't being reckless, I was being comfortable. And comfort, it turns out, can be way more expensive than impulse. I noticed I do this socially too. Picking the pricier option so nobody had to debate. Covering small gaps to keep things moving. Paying extra so the moment wouldn't stall. I told myself I was being easygoing. Low maintenance, but over time, that added up. Not just in dollars, but in this quiet pressure to always keep things smooth. To never be the one who slowed the group down. When I looked back at a year of it, it was thousands. Spent not on things I wanted, but on avoiding mild social friction. That realization didn't feel financial at first. It felt emotional, like I'd been paying to not be inconvenient. And that's a weird thing to see written down in numbers. There's something about lines that really gets me. Long lines, slow systems, anything that makes me wait. I'll pay extra just to move past it. Fast passes, priority boarding, expedited service. Each one feels justified in isolation. But when I thought about how often I chose speed over cost, it started to feel like a pattern, almost a reflex. I didn't like waiting because waiting made me notice how tired I was. So I paid to skip it. That's uncomfortable to admit because it means I wasn't buying convenience. I was buying distraction, and distraction has a way of billing you quietly over and over without ever delivering what it promises. The part that really stuck with me was realizing how little joy any of this brought. The money was doing its job, removing friction, but it wasn't adding anything meaningful back. No memory, no satisfaction, just a slightly smoother path through the day. When I finally did a rough yearly estimate of all my just to make it easier spending, it was well into 5 figures. That number landed heavy, not shocking, just heavy, because I could see how it happened. One small choice at a time. No drama. No moment where I'd stopped and said, this is too much. It just accumulated quietly, like dust you don't notice until the light hits it right. I started thinking about how often I confused ease with care. Like, if something was hard, it meant I was doing life wrong. So I paid to make it feel softer. But the softness never lasted. It just reset the discomfort clock. I'd buy convenience today and tomorrow I'd need it again. That's the part I didn't want to look at first, because it suggested I wasn't solving anything. I was renting relief, and renting gets expensive, especially when the contract renews every single day without asking. Even small upgrades play into this. Better seats, larger sizes, slightly nicer versions of things. Not because the difference mattered, but because choosing the basic option felt like settling. I remember upgrading a rental car once just to avoid the line at the counter. Cost me $30. Felt nothing. Did it again next time. Over a year, that habit alone was hundreds, maybe more. And none of it made the trips better. It just made the process quieter. That's when I started noticing how often I equated quiet with value, and how expensive silence can be when you keep paying for it. What makes this tricky is that none of it feels like a mistake while it's happening. It feels reasonable, earned, practical. That's why it's uncomfortable to see it clearly, because there's no villain, no bad decision, just a series of small yeses, and those are harder to argue with. I wasn't being dumb, I was being tired, and tired people are very good customers. Will pay to not think, to not wait, to not explain. And that realization made me pause longer than I expected. I think about the nights I'd pay extra just to avoid cooking, then sit on the couch scrolling anyway. Time wasn't the issue, energy was, and money can't really buy energy back. It can only mask the absence of it. That's a subtle thing to notice, because it means the spending wasn't about food or convenience, it was about how depleted I felt. And once I saw that, the charges started to look different. Less like treats, more like coping mechanisms with a monthly bill attached. There's a strange loneliness in realizing How much you've paid just to stay comfortable, not luxurious, comfortable. Smooth edges, no bumps, and yet still feeling worn down. When I added up a decade of this kind of spending, rough estimate, it was easily 6 figures. That number didn't scare me. It saddened me a little. Because I could imagine other versions of my life that money could have supported, and I hadn't even noticed it leaving. I don't think avoiding friction is wrong. Sometimes it makes sense. Sometimes it's necessary. What bothered me was how automatic it became, how rarely I noticed the pattern. It wasn't a choice anymore, it was a default setting. And defaults don't care about your future. They just keep running, realizing that didn't come with a solution, just awareness. And awareness, I've found, is uncomfortable before it's useful. I still catch myself doing it, paying extra to skip a step, to smooth a moment. And now there's this brief pause afterward. Not judgment, just recognition. Like, oh, that again. That pause is new, and it doesn't always change anything. Sometimes I still pay, but it feels different knowing what it really is. Not convenience, not efficiency, just friction avoidance with a price tag. What surprised me most was how invisible the spending felt compared to big purchases. No anxiety, no second thoughts, just quiet acceptance. And that's probably why it lasted so long, because nothing ever forced me to look at it. It didn't hurt enough in any one moment. It just wore me down slowly, financially and mentally, in the background. Sometimes I imagine all those small payments lined up. Every skipped inconvenience, every avoided pause, every moment I chose ease over engagement. It's not a dramatic image, just a long receipt. And there's something sobering about that. Not regret exactly, more like clarity. Seeing the shape of a habit that once felt shapeless. Lately, when I'm standing in a line or cooking something simple or waiting a little longer than I want to, there's this quiet thought that shows up. Not proud, not annoyed, just present. Like, maybe this moment doesn't need to be fixed. Maybe it doesn't need my money. And then the day keeps moving. Bills still exist. Fatigue still shows up. But that small pause lingers. Like a receipt I finally bothered to read.